bring in Karl Rove, Fox News contributor and former White House Deputy Chief of Staff. There's so many things I want to ask you, Karl. First, could you listen to something that Biden said yesterday about all this?
But this president keeps throwing gasoline in the fire every place he goes. He was asked about what should be done with regard to a young man shot in the back 7 times in front of his children. I didn't hear much of anything come from him. And the fact is that he is not acting very responsibly.
Karl, I wanted to get your take on how a campaign responds to news of the day, things that happen. And do you think that the Trump campaign has been able to lure Biden onto turf that they would rather be fighting on?
Well, I'm not certain they've lured him onto it. I think the Biden campaign woke up and realized they had a huge problem, that their candidate was on the wrong side of this issue, badly on the wrong side of the issue, which is why after weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of refusing to denounce the violence that we've seen coming forward on our TV screens, that he finally did. But again, I think they made a mistake in doing so. They tried to be too cute. They tried to say all of the stuff that you're seeing going on in Portland and Kenosha and elsewhere is Trump's fault. He's responsible for it. Well, I think the average American looks at it and it says those thugs, those anarchists, those looters, they're responsible for their violent actions. It's not the responsibility of somebody else. What our leaders are responsible for is upholding the rule of law and standing up to this kind of lawlessness that we've seen play out on our streets in America. And why Biden does it more forcefully and hasn't consistently and forcefully denounced that violence is just simply beyond me.
Take a listen to how the president framed it yesterday at his event in North Carolina.
They're anarchists. They're anarchists. They're agitators. They're looters and rioters. And then you hear the Democrats, they never say anything bad about them. They never say anything bad about them. And the reason is, I guess they count on their votes or they're afraid of them. They might very well be afraid of them. But they never say, even Biden in his speech, he never mentioned the words law and order, never mentioned the word police.
What do you think about that messaging?
Well, it'd be better if it was short and succinct. And then the short and succinct version of that is they spent a 4-day national Democratic convention and weren't able to bring themselves one time to bring up the issue of violence in our cities and denounce it. That's the ultimate test. If you don't think it's a problem, and you don't bother to talk about it for the 4 days of your party's national convention, it suggests that the party is not willing and not willing to confront that problem and not willing to stand up and do something about it. I think the president had a point there. I'd put it a little bit more succinctly and a little bit more direct.
All right, let's ask you about the election that's coming up. Of course, we're talking about the election, but Kellyanne Conway had some thoughts about who she thinks might show up to the polls that might not show up in actual polls that we're looking at right now, but that will make it to the polling booth. Take a listen to Kellyanne.
As the person who coined the term hidden undercover Trump voter in 2016, there are even more of them, and they're even more committed now. And they're going to surprise you as to who they are this time, because you see the polls, 62% of Republicans or Trump supporters are afraid to even express themselves, but they express themselves in the ballot box.
How many, undercover, shy Trump voters do you think there are, and how do you campaign if you don't exactly know that number?
Yeah, well, we don't really know. We do have a little bit of evidence. Remember, the national polls, the average of the national polls going into the election day in 2016 showed Hillary Clinton with about a 3%, just over a 3% lead in the popular vote, and she ended up by winning it by 2.1. Now, 1% may not sound like a lot, but remember, that's more than the margin of victory in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, which gave Trump the White House. Gave him the election and with it the White House. So I suspect that percentage of, quote, shy Trump voters, we get that term for the Brits, incidentally, as you know, shy Tory voters. There's a pretty consistent history in British polling and election polling that people who support the Conservative Party, the Tories, tend not to express that. And as a result, the Tories overperform their last poll numbers in most elections. I think there's probably that same thing going on here in 2020 as it did in 2016, and maybe a little bit larger. I'm not certain it's much larger, maybe 2 points, but again, that may be understating the president's support as it will show up on election day. But we'll see here, 60 days.
Let me ask you about Election Day, because your column today in the Wall Street Journal, which I read last night because I always try to read it the night before, you're trying to condition people to be thinking about Election Day as perhaps not knowing the result that day. What do you want people to be thinking about as they look ahead just 60 days from now?
Well, I want us to realize we've done this to ourselves. We're going to have a mail-in ballot because of the pandemic. But think about this. There are about a baker's dozen battleground states, 13 battleground states. And 4 of those allow the ballots to be received after the election day. Ohio, you can get it up to the 13th. North Carolina, up to the 6th. Minnesota and Nevada, you can have a ballot show up on the 10th. So if it's really, really close, those ballots that arrive in the days after the election are going to be problematic. 5 states don't allow you to begin verifying these mail-in ballots until Election Day itself. Maine, Michigan, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Why is that important? Because when that mail-in ballot comes, you have to verify the signature, generally on the back flap of the envelope, against what's on your records. Your voter registration rolls, to make certain that the signatures match. And then you have to begin to check that ballot to see that it was filled out properly. And not insignificant number of mail-in ballots are declared invalid because people don't abide by the rules. One state has both problems. Iowa both allows you the votes to be arrived on the 9th and doesn't allow you to begin verifying until the election day. That means if you get millions of ballots in these states, combined, you're going to be days before you work your way through that. So we're doing this to ourselves. I hope wherever they can, they change the rules to allow them to begin verifying ballots earlier.
I agree. Well, it was a good warning and a great column, as always. Karl Rove, thank you.